the number one indicator that you might be running low on potassium. But before we get to that, I'm actually going to walk you through 7 warning signs, saving the most common one for last. First, though, there's a specific number you need to commit to memory, 4,700 milligrams. That is the daily amount of potassium the average human body requires. Now, when you compare that to all the other nutrient recommendations out there, like calcium, magnesium, or vitamin C, nothing else comes even remotely close to this high of a daily requirement. So why do we need so much potassium, and yet fewer than 3% of Americans actually hit this target? And keep in mind, this is just the RDA, the bare minimum to get by. Not even the therapeutic level needed to correct an existing deficiency. That means 97 out of every 100 people are walking around with low potassium levels, and most of them have no idea. In fact, the vast majority of people aren't even consuming half of this amount each day. So the real question isn't, am I deficient? It's how deficient am I? And the symptoms I'm about to share will actually help you gauge just how severe your deficiency might be. Let's jump right into them. Number 7. Constipation. This one catches a lot of people off guard because they rarely connect constipation with a lack of potassium. But here's the key. Potassium controls the smooth muscles throughout your body. Your entire colon is made of smooth muscle. So when you don't have enough potassium, you lose the ability to properly control the contraction and relaxation of those muscles in your colon. As a result, things start backing up because that natural pumping action is no longer working efficiently. Hospitals even have a name for a severe version of this condition caused by extreme potassium deficiency, paralytic ileus. That basically means your small intestine becomes paralyzed. It just stops working. This often shows up after surgery, which brings up another important point. When someone undergoes any type of surgical procedure, it doesn't matter which one, the body experiences intense trauma and stress. Even though your central nervous system is unconscious, your body still feels everything. That's why doctors frequently give patients an IV with potassium after surgery. The body releases a massive spike of cortisol and adrenaline, which then triggers a flushing effect of potassium. If you don't have enough stored potassium, you can face serious complications, including this intestinal paralysis. And that leads us directly to number 6. Number 6, bloating and water retention. When most people think of bloating, they assume they ate something that didn't agree with them. They rarely consider a potassium deficiency as the culprit. But here's what happens. When your potassium levels drop, your kidneys lose their ability to flush out excess sodium. As a result, you start holding on to fluid. Potassium and sodium work as a team to balance your body's fluids. A lot of people get stuck thinking, oh, I have too much sodium. But the truth is, you probably just don't have enough potassium. Sodium holds water in, while potassium helps release that water, reducing puffiness and swelling. So before you blame salt, consider potassium. Number 5, frequent urination and excessive thirst. Typically, when we hear about those symptoms, we think of diabetes, right? Someone with blood sugar issues urinates often, especially at night, and feels constantly thirsty. But a potassium deficiency can also cause this, and that surprises many people. Low potassium slows down your kidney's ability to concentrate urine. Instead of producing normal concentrated urine, your kidneys start producing large amounts of diluted urine, which means you pee more frequently. That itself can lead to further potassium loss. There's also another important link between potassium and insulin. When we talk about diabetes, we talk about insulin and insulin resistance. Here's how it works. In your pancreas, you have tiny cells called beta cells that control insulin release. Those beta cells depend on potassium, so you need potassium to properly regulate insulin. This is why diabetics are almost always very deficient in potassium. And it's also why people who are severely low in potassium tend to be more pre-diabetic or even diabetic. This ties back to something I emphasize in many of my videos. People need more electrolytes, especially potassium in sufficient amounts, and they also need to be on a low-carb diet. Combining both creates massive positive effects on your health. And of course, if you're diabetic, you should be eating more potassium-rich foods or even taking potassium to help reduce your reliance on medication and improve blood sugar regulation. Number 4, tingling and numbness, especially in your feet and sometimes in your hands. We usually think of this as peripheral neuropathy from diabetes, but it can also be caused by a potassium deficiency, whether you're diabetic or not. That's because potassium is essential for nerve impulses. Without enough potassium, your nervous system doesn't function properly. So this isn't just a B12 or B1 deficiency. It could very well be a potassium issue. For a nerve impulse to travel, potassium is required. Think of potassium as an electrical charge. This also relates to where those nerves go. They connect to muscles. So you can have muscle problems, whether in the heart or in skeletal muscles like cramps. I know in other videos I've mentioned that cramps can come from magnesium deficiency, but stay tuned because we'll talk more about that connection. Number 3, high pulse rate. Quick story. Many years ago when I was getting married, my wife and I were at an Italian restaurant eating a lot of pasta, deeply engaged in conversation. Apparently, we were the last customers in the place. Then I noticed a waiter walking by with a cart full of desserts. He came over and said, "Before we throw these out, would you like to sample any?" And of course, I hate wasting food, so we sampled every single dessert. After that massive carbohydrate and sugar load, and I mean a lot of sugar, what I didn't realize at the time was that consuming that much sugar and refined carbs makes your body's need for potassium shoot straight up. In other words, you suddenly become deficient in potassium. And one of the first signs you'll notice is a higher pulse rate. Your heart starts working harder, producing these pounding beats. So when you lay your head on the pillow and actually hear your heartbeat, boom, 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 think low potassium. I didn't know back then that if I had taken some potassium, it would have brought my pulse rate down and helped me drift into a great sleep. Number 2, heart palpitations. I've mentioned this briefly in other videos. I often talk about heart palpitations or atrial fibrillation as a magnesium deficiency, but it can also be a potassium deficiency. Both electrolytes work together on the heart's pacemaker. They keep your heart in rhythm because they are deeply involved in the electrical voltage that controls each heartbeat. Let's look deeper at what potassium actually does. You have a combination of 2 pumps. One is the sodium-potassium pump, a tiny pump that allows electrical charge to develop in the nervous system, which then activates your muscles. Deep inside your mitochondria, you have another pump that produces energy, that's ATP, and that pump requires magnesium. So you need magnesium to make the energy that runs this little pump. But you also need that magnesium-powered energy to make the sodium-potassium pump work. In other words, the sodium-potassium pump is dependent on magnesium. It doesn't work alone. This is why when you take an electrolyte powder, you need all the electrolytes, not just one. And now, number 1, the most common sign of a potassium deficiency. This is the most misdiagnosed and biochemically significant sign of all: persistent fatigue and muscle weakness that does not improve with sleep or rest. You feel tired, heavy, slow, sluggish, and mentally foggy. When that happens, think potassium. Don't buy into the idea that I must just be getting older. That's usually not the case. More often than not, it's a potassium deficiency. Why am I so confident? Because less than 3% of Americans even hit the RDA for potassium. Now that you know all of this, there's one more incredibly common disease, probably the most chronic disease in the United States. It affects over 120 million Americans. And here's what's bizarre. 90% of these cases are labeled as unknown cause, 50 years and billions of dollars in research, and they still can't find the cause of high blood pressure. Well, I completely disagree. I've created an entire video on this topic, and you need to watch it right now. You'll find it right here.